Hello crafters and welcome back to the This Calls for Confetti YouTube channel. My name is Deepa from Designs by D, and today I am sharing a fun vintage clock with you with a shaker element. And we're going to have some fun with kind of refashioning our stamps and tools today in order to work for this card. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be using. A lot of these products are from the March collection, which is the Moments and Times collection. I've got the Every Moment stamp set here, and then the die set, which cuts out everything from the stamp set, including all of the sentiments. I've got the Moments in Time die set. I'm just going to be using the gear elements from that. I've got some Merlot glitter confetti and then some foilable acetate sheets, meaning they are heat resistant. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I'm grabbing those acetate sheets and I'm going to cut this large sheet into 5.5 by 4.25. So I've cut it into 4s, just like you would a card panel. So I have another card panel here. I have it down to the same size, 5.5 by 4.25, just because I have a whole bunch of panels cut up to the side. I am just stamping out this gorgeous grandfather type clock here, even though it's like the smaller version, right? I'm going to stamp it out with some deep purple or plum ink here. And I did stamp it out a couple times just to get a really good imprint there. Now I'm going to grab that acetate sheet and I'm using some of the anti-static powder from This Calls for Confetti on top of that acetate sheet. I'm going to stamp this out again with the same ink and carefully remove it. You only have to do this once, and I would recommend only doing it once because it's acetate, it's a bit more slippery. You can blur the image a little bit. So do that once and then add some clear embossing powder to it and heat it up with the heat tool in order to melt everything. So you'll notice everything turned dark, and then once it has cooled a bit, wipe all of that extra embossing, so not the embossing powder and the anti-static powder, off with a towel. Now I've got the die. I'm going to go ahead and just simply cut this out using the coordinating die. And then once that's done, you can see it pops out very easily. And we are going to refashion this die, or this cutout stamped and dyed image. So I'm using a self-healing mat. I've got a steel ruler and an X-Acto knife here, and I'm pretty much just going to cut out the center of the clock. All I want is that beautiful frame, and this is going to make more sense in a minute because we're making this like a see-through shaker card, right? So I've cut on both ends. I'm going to cut around the curve. I do cut with the X-Acto knife and then with scissors just to get everything out nicely. And then again at the bottom, I'm going to cut just a couple straight lines beside that little flourish at the bottom. And then I'm going to use my scissors to cut around that flourish. So the only time this gets tricky is where your cut lines meet. That's why the scissors come in handy. And I'd say like the hardest part is this here. Be very careful not to cut yourself. I'm very experienced at using the X-Acto knife because I do it for a lot of things. So don't worry, I did not cut myself, but please be careful if you're doing this. And as I mentioned, as you get to the corners, it gets a little bit harder. You don't get right to the very edge. So the scissors help you to cut this all out. Okay, so and it's up to you. You can cut just maybe the circle of the clock out if you wanted. You could cut this entire portion that I'm doing. You could alter it in any way that you want, which is the best part about it. So now I'm grabbing some plum colored ink and I'm using a very small, one of the detail blending brushes, and I'm just kind of picking up the ink a little bit, dabbing off a little bit in the cover, and then lightly adding the ink to the outline of the frame of this clock. I just want to add a little bit of color to give it that vintage look, like it's a bit old, but as I mentioned, this clock is more about minimalism than adding a lot of detail, which is in contrast to the card that I have to show you in a couple weeks, but that's where we're going with this one. You could use the purple or you could use a different color. It's completely up to you. And now we're going to go ahead and cut our background panels. So I've got this deep red cardstock, which I cut to 5.25 by 4, and then the white cardstock cut to 5 inches by 3 3/4. This just creates a small little border around each of these, and this is how they're going to layer on top of each other and create this fun, neat bordered look. So now I'm grabbing the outline, or sorry, the die for the clock again, and I'm placing it on the white panel. So this is our top panel. It's going to be the front of our card, which shows everything. So I'm going to cut out the clock just a little bit towards the bottom so I have space at the top for my sentiment. And again, I'm going to adjust this cutout. I'm just going to cut that little portion at the bottom completely straight because I want my shaker bits to show even when they're not being shaked up at the top. This is just a fun way to kind of make sure that people know, hey, even if I haven't got any of the shaker bits near the top, go ahead and shake your card. And it also shows the color of it, which I think is fun. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the gears from the Moment in Time die set, and I'm going to cut them out of some silver cardstock, just a few times, actually a couple times, because I'm going to use some of those gears in the background. So I'm just using my mini die cutting machine here to cut this out. I find that it works well for the smaller pieces here. For the gears, you have all of these little bits in the center. I found that some of mine stayed in, so I just kept them, or you can pop out the little circles to create the proper looking gears. It's up to you. I kept them for some of them, and then for others I didn't. Now for my sentiment, I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. I'm using just the long sentiment across the top because it seems to fit on my card. I'm going to go ahead and line that up in my stamp positioner and stamp that out with the same colored ink that I used to stamp out the actual clock frame. Now that I've got that done, I've got another, this is just a scrap piece of white. Honestly, you can see I didn't even cut it properly rectangle, but it's just enough so that our clock is white in the background when we put that die cut piece on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this to the red cardstock to create that layer there. And then the red cardstock can be glued on top of the white cardstock panel, which is a little bit larger. Okay, so now we have our acetate piece. We're going to go ahead and line it up with that front piece where we die cut the clock out of it. So it's just the negative piece that we have with the sentiment at the top. We're going to line up the acetate and stick this right on top so you can see the clock through, and then we're going to cut off the overhanging bits of acetate. Be sure not to cut down the panel anymore, just the acetate. So now you can see this coming together. So we've created the front part of our shaker with the acetate and the clock showing through. Now, if you don't like the look of how that clock embossed on the acetate, you could always just stamp the clock in the background, that white piece of a regular cardstock that we stamped down. Stamp the clock there and make sure everything is lined up with the die cut piece for the front, and then you can just put some plain acetate on the front for the cover of the for the top layer of the shaker, and you don't have to stamp anything on it. It's really up to you. I went ahead and did the embossing because I thought it looked kind of cool. Now I've created my well here using some thin foam strips. You can use any foam strips you have on hand in order to create the well of our shaker. It doesn't have to be exactly the shape of that clock. I'm just kind of making it outlined, kind of like mostly a square, and the top part goes to a point where the clock does. Now, as I craft, I always like to kind of make sure everything is lining up as I go. So I've just checked that there. I'm adding some more foam squares to the back to kind of prop up the edges here because that shaker compartment is a little bit smaller than the edges of the card. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all ready and take all of the backing pieces off. And now I'm grabbing those gorgeous Merlot confetti shaker bits, and I'm going to go ahead, place it down in the center there on the card base, and I will attach the well with the front of the card like so, and make sure I press everything down so those Merlot shaker confetti are not going anywhere. Now, the one thing I forgot to do is to use the TCFC anti-static powder around the edges of my foam there so that, you know, my confetti's not sticking to it, but it's okay. I did kind of tap it down a bit, and eventually the shaker bits were set free and and they were able to move around the card as they are supposed to. So now we have that frame of the clock, which we die cut, stamped, cut out, And now I'm using some foam adhesive to attach this to the front of the acetate. So that creates that full clock, and you can see how the shaker bits kind of fall to the bottom of the clock. It's a very unique feature. No one really does this, right? But I thought that it would make it easier to, one, create the well, and two, show you that there's shaker bits in here when it settles to the bottom so that people know to kind of shake it around. And it also shows more of those shaker bits, which I want to see because I love the look of them on this card. Now I'm going to go ahead and attach some of these silver gears just around the edges, just little bits, 2 or 3 here and there around the bottom, the side, the top corner, just to create a bit of interest. If you wanted, you could put these gears on top of that acetate in the middle of the clock to create the gears inside the clock. It's completely up to you. I just felt like I really wanted those shaker bits to show, so I didn't want to cover them up anymore. It's actually really unfortunate. In the video, it's a bit better. It's harder to capture the color of those Merlot shaker bits in the pictures, but they're absolutely stunning. I think that they've got to be like one of my favorite colors from all of the shaker bits that are on the site, minus the the aura colored, the white ones that just go with everything. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and add all these gears down. If you wanted to, you could prop a couple up with foam if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep these flat so that clock stays as the star of the show. And then finally, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add some more of these gorgeous Merlot confetti bits to the background just to create a bit more of a cohesive design. And that is our vintage shaker clock card. So I hope that everything that I've shared in this video inspires you to create something similar. Everything that we've used is linked in the description below, and I hope to see you guys again next time. Have a great time and a great weekend. I'll see you then. Bye.